Hey guys, so today I'm going to cover buckets and best practices for using and creating buckets. So typically, you might ask, why should I use a bucket? So out of the box, if you don't use a bucket and you're creating, for example, a blog and you have articles underneath, what you might typically find is that you might end up with multiple articles underneath the blog. Um, Out of the box, that wouldn't be an issue if you were to manually kind of bucket those items. So if you manually bucketed or manually foldered all your articles by year, such as when you create a new article, you were to create new folders 2016, 2017, and then add those items into that. Um, you wouldn't necessarily see the negatives of doing that, but you may, depending on the number of articles you have. So let's say you are not doing that, and let's say you have hundreds of articles underneath blog. You're going to see down performance issues with that. So when you open up the blog item and you go to see all your articles, if you have hundreds, usually typically the standard is 100, but I've seen scenarios where there is 100 and the time it takes to load those children doesn't take too long. But if you go much over that, you get 200, 300, 400 items underneath there. One, it's really hard to find what you're looking for because you have, I mean, it could be, I mean, even though it's doing alphabetically, it can be challenging to find those items. But the second thing is it's going to take a while to load all those items. You're going to basically be loading 400 items when you open up that parent item, that blog, or whatever it may be. So that's the benefit of using a bucketing structure. What it's going to do is it's going to use different rules and conditions to create buckets automatically. So it's going to folder those items. So instead of hundreds, if not thousands, of articles underneath there, it's going to automatically structure them in a whatever way that you choose. By default, it's going to use the date to create like a year, a month, a day, a second, a millisecond, whatever. It's going to create a really, in my opinion, a really horrible structure because it's actually going to, when you view those articles on the front end, your URLs are going to contain all those bucket levels, which is ideal. So I'm going to also show how you can configure your buckets to be more user URL friendly, and also control what the bucketing rules are. Second, another big challenge I've seen from content editors is they they don't like the way it's bucketing. So if you're creating a blog, um, you've created a blog, you are creating items. Let's say you create an article for a blog. It's going to use, if you do it by date, it's going to use the created date, the date that you've actually created the article to bucket. But you might not want to bucket based off that. You might want to bucket based off the date that it goes live. Um, so that's obviously an issue. Um, which you can create some custom rules for that, but they are still are not perfect. So I've seen a lot of issues with buckets. Buckets are there to solve that one issue with performance of Sitecore. But if you educate your users, you may find that you can just have them create this folder structure manually, and they will be much happier with the way it's foldering everything versus the automatic bucketing of stuff. So talk to your content editors or the content managers that are managing the content that you're architecting and see what makes sense for them. Some are okay with the bucketing logic as long as it makes sense and you can customize it to kind of fit their needs. So let's go ahead and just show how you would do this. Best practice in my mind is to create a base template for your bucket and for your bucketable items. So I'm going to create a base bucket folder, and I'm just going to have an inherit from the base that we've defined in previous sessions. So a base in this is just it doesn't have any fields or anything like that. So we're just basically creating a base template for this. So if you didn't want to have it inherit from base, you could just have it inherit from standard template. It doesn't matter. So there's that. And so for the bucket folder, what you'd want to do is create an insert option. So, or not an insert option, but you want to create standard values for that. So if you watch my previous video, if you go to base bucket, you go to the builder tab and you find the builder tab up here. You'll see that now you have some additional options. You can click on standard values, which will basically create this additional file here. Now on this item is where you define the bucket rules. So since this is the bucket itself, you're just going to click this option to is bucket. Um, Typically you wouldn't actually click that. You would actually go up to configure and just click bucket for this item. And behind the scenes, it's actually going to, um, if you go back to the content, you'll see that it's actually checked just is bucket. So either way, I think it's actually better to do it from this editor because it's going to do a few other things at the same time. I'm sure it's not just checking this option. So the second thing is to do a base bucketable item. Not sure if that's spelled correctly. Like I said, if you don't have bases defined already, you can just select standard template. But since in my solution I have a base that everything inherits from, I'll just select that. And then for this one, we are going to select bucketable. Actually, wait 1 second before we do that. We actually want to create a standard values for that as well, because you want it to be on the insert or when you insert a new item, it's going to apply those rules. You don't want to necessarily apply it to the main template itself. So I'll go to options, standard values, and then now I'll make those changes. So for this one, I just want it to be bucketable, so I'll select that. Um, and lastly, there's this other option, lock child relationships. Basically, if you have items that sit underneath your bucketable item and you want that hierarchy to be maintained, you would select this option. So a situation where you might want to have this selected is if you have an article and you have comments that sit underneath that article. You would want this. You'd want to lock it. Um, Whereas if you don't care about your structure, then you might not. And typically, I rarely ever check this, but since in this scenario, I'd want to keep that hierarchy in place, I'm going to click that option. So now we've defined these two bases. Now we're going to assign them to our blog and article respectively. So the blog item is going to use the um, base bucket folder. So I'm going to select that, click save, and then for article, it's going to be base bucketable item, like that. Save, and now it's good to go. So let's test this out. If we go up to home, insert blog, I'll just insert a basic blog. And now I'll insert an article. And one thing that shows that it's already taken it is when you do insert, it's showing you that you have saved search. So it's thinking it's already a bucket. So if you go to configure, you'll see that it already considers it a bucket, and revert and sync are actually already there as options. So if I do insert article, test article, click OK, it's actually created it as a bucket. It's saying that there's hidden items because this is a bucket that is in here, but you can actually see the buckets it's automatically creating. I find maybe those containers that are confused by buckets should not have what I'm about to show you turned on. They should just accept that they're bucketed. And if they accept it's bucketed, they can actually find their articles. So if I search for test, you can then pull up that test article and start editing that item right here. So um, try not to confuse your content editors. Just try to keep this simple. But if they're the types that they're smart and they can understand what you're about to show them, you can actually go to view and click on buckets, and this will basically show you the contents of our bucket. So by default, it's actually created this pretty elaborate um, bucketing structure. So the year, the month, the day, April 23rd, the minute just happened to be um, it just happened to be, and actually I think that's hour. I don't know, hour, minute, second, something like that. And then it puts it here. So now you see the article, it's layered at this level. The only problem is if now you go to visit this article, you're going to have to go to /blog 2017 04 23 17 20 test article. So it's pretty long, not very friendly for SEO. Can be confusing for it. If anybody wants to remember this link, they have to remember this in extremely long path. So there's ways to change this, and I'll show that in a second. I also wanted to note that once you show a content editor this structure, they they might want to start changing it. So that's the reason I said that you might not want to show them this structure, just because they're going to want to change it. They're going to want to change it manually, typically, because the content editor is not as familiar with some of the automated features that you're going to see. So they might start changing this structure, and they might start moving these items around. But what they don't realize is that if you go on a blog item and you go to configure, if you ever click this sync button, what it's going to do is it's going to automatically restructure everything and automatically create this folder structure again. It's going to lose all their changes. So if they manually create this bucket structure, they're going to lose all their changes. Also, another thing I've seen a lot is that they'll create the wrong type of folder items in here. So these are special types of things that inherit from item buckets bucket. They're not a typical common folder. They're a special type of folder, if that makes sense. So I've seen a lot of confusion about this. It's really good to kind of train them on this properly, so that they don't get confused. They need to understand that this is an automation process. This bucketing is not meant to um, have them manually make changes. It's more as an automation feature, and just an automation feature to enhance um, their ability to have tons of content items in a specific folder. So really, blog and test article. Um, One thing I'd like to say is I mentioned that this URL path is really long. What you could do is define a custom kind of URL for these. So you could actually strip off this long path, and it can still resolve the blog/test article as being just blog/test article if you create up a custom rewrite. Um, Issues with that being is if you have multiple items with the same name, it's not going to know which one to pull. So um, that's something to keep in mind. The second option is to customize this bucketing logic. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to delete this article, and then I'm going to resync this. Let's see, and now it's deleted all those folders because there's nothing underneath it anymore. So now there's a way to customize the buckets and how it buckets items. So to do that, we will go into settings, buckets, and an item bucket settings. So if you click this item is a way that you can use the rules engine to define how different types of items are bucketed. So this item will actually contain multiple bucketing rules if you're in a large implementation. So if you had events, you had articles, you had other maybe various types of articles, in fact, you might want to bucket all those items differently. So some you might want to base off the created date, some you might want to base off some sort of custom rules. You can actually, by default, out of the box, you can bucket based off the first letter or first few letters of an item name, etc. One of my favorite ways to bucket is if you have, a menu, or if you have some sort of glossary, you can bucket based off the first letter. So if you had a glossary, it would bucket, if it's like definition of ABC, then it would bucket in A, and then ABC would be the URL. And when you have that kind of structure, it's not necessarily a bad thing from a URL standpoint. You're going to have a very simple structure, but yet it's still going to automatically bucket. I think if these are defined properly, you're going to see less resistance from your content editors. The one thing I will note about dates is that it by default it's going to base off the created date, and typically a lot of content editors will actually want it to base off some other date. So, and that's where it gets a little tricky. So the bucketing happens at the time of creation of the item. So if you have it based off a different field that isn't created by default on ad, such as a publish date or a live date or an air date or something like that, it's not going to be able to bucket that until you sync the item, until you add that field and then you sync the item later. So it's one of the biggest flaws I see with buckets, and I'm trying to actually work on a way to resolve that. So when you create an item, you can actually specify what fields you want to make a change to, and then when you save it, it will have the context of that value, and it will automatically bucket based off that value. So let's go ahead and just define this, what I'm doing. So I'll click on edit rule. You'll have now see this choose conditions and choose actions. So with this, you can actually customize these conditions. So if you wanted to say that I want it to bucket based off this condition or that condition that is currently not defined, then you can define new ones. I'm not going to cover how to define these in this session, but I will talk about this more when I do a session on how to customize the rules engine. And then lastly is you can also choose an action. So these are basically create a folder based off this field and create it in this format. But you can also customize. I've done customizations where you can customize on custom fields and then custom formats. So for this, I'm going to create a new rule. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say I want to, where the item bucket is based on a specific template. So I'll select this. First, before I get too crazy, is I'm going to rename the rule just to make it a little easier for future people that are trying to make changes to this. I'm going to call this blog articles. So if you come in here and you see a bunch of them listed, different rules, you now know that that this rule is based on the blog article, so then you can change it later. So I'm going to say based on the template blog. And then I can now also say where the new buckable item is based on a specific template. So I'll select that. And then I'll select article. Now it's saying this rule action is these two conditions. It's based off this folder, and this is the type of item that's added to it. So you could actually, if you had blog and then you had different types of articles, maybe you had press releases and articles and news and things like that all contained within this blog, you could customize how they're bucketed differently depending on their bucket item type. Next, we're going to create a rule where the folder structure is based on the creation date of the new buckable item in this format. So I'll select that option, and then I can customize the format. So I will say I want them to only be by year. So it's using standard date format, C# formatting. So YYYY represents the year. So I can just say OK to that, and now I'm done. And click OK, click Save, and I would typically publish here, but it doesn't matter. So now if I go back to blog and I create insert article, test article, it's just gone ahead and only created a like an automatic bucket folder for the year. That's it. So now the URL for test article is actually pretty simple. It's just going to be /blog/2017/test article. So that's it. That's the magic of doing a bucket. Like I said, I'll do a session here soon on how to customize the buckets, how it buckets, and the create custom conditions and custom actions. I'm also going to talk a little bit more about the rules engine because it's not just used here; it's used in other areas of Sitecore. So, all right, be on the lookout for that. If you have any questions about this, please feel free to reach out to me. Have a good day.